The forest was silent before the cry broke it, a sound of panic, young and desperate, echoing through the grey mist that crawled between the trees. "She's dying! Please help!" The boy's voice trembled like brittle glass, piercing the stillness of dawn. King Edric of Norhollow reined in his horse. The frost on his beard glinted beneath the pale light, and for a heartbeat he wondered if he had imagined it. But then the cry came again, closer this time, and filled with terror. His men looked at him for command, but he had already dismounted. "Stay back," he ordered, his voice sharp as the wind. "If it's an ambush, I'll know." He moved through the underbrush, boots sinking into damp earth, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The scent of pine and cold smoke clung to the air. Then, through the fog, he saw them. A boy, no older than 12, cradling a woman's limp body. Her hair was tangled with mud and blood, her dress torn and soaked from the river's edge. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of the man before him, the steel of a crown faintly gleaming beneath his hood. "Please, sir," the boy gasped. "She needs help. She's not breathing right." Edric knelt beside them, pushing back the woman's hair. Her skin was pale, her pulse weak but steady. She smelled faintly of lavender and iron. He recognized the emblem sewn into the remnants of her cloak, a healer's mark from the border villages, burned and outlawed since the rebellion. "Who is she?" he asked quietly. The boy swallowed hard. "My sister, Ilara." Edric's jaw tightened. A healer accused of aiding rebels, the very kind his council had sworn to root out. Every instinct told him to walk away. Yet as her shallow breaths brushed the cold air, something in him refused to let her die. He removed his cloak and wrapped it around her trembling frame. What happened? "The guards. They chased us, said she gave herbs to traitors, but she only tried to help the sick." "She never hurt anyone." Edric looked at the boy, so fierce in his plea, so pure in his fear, and saw the reflection of a truth he had long buried. Mercy was rarer than gold in this land. He lifted Ilara into his arms. She was light as a bundle of reeds, but the weight of his choice pressed like iron on his chest. "What's your name, boy?" "Finn," he whispered. "Then, Finn," Edric said, glancing back toward the mist, "you'll ride with me. Your sister will live." The boy blinked, disbelief flickering into hope. "You'll help her?" "I will," Edric said. "And if she's guilty, I'll hear it from her own lips, not the mouths of frightened men." He carried her through the woods, his steps deliberate, steady, each one defying the law that demanded her death. Behind him, the forest swallowed the echoes of pursuit. His horse neighed low, sensing the burden now shared. By the time they reached the clearing, the sun had risen, thin and reluctant through the clouds. The fortress of Norhollow stood distant on the horizon, its towers black against the light. Edric felt the eyes of his soldiers, confused and wary. "So, Your Majesty," one of them dared to say, "she's one of them." "Then she's mine to judge," Edric answered, his tone leaving no room for question. He mounted with Ilara still in his arms, her head resting against his chest. Finn followed close behind, clutching the reins of a borrowed horse. As they rode toward the castle, the king felt something shift, a whisper of rebellion not in his kingdom, but within himself. And for those drawn to tales where mercy dares to stand against power, where love is born in the shadow of judgment, subscribe now. More stories from forgotten kingdoms await, where hearts defy crowns and courage begins in silence. The fortress of Norhollow loomed above the valley, its grey walls slick with rain and time. Inside, warmth clung stubbornly to the stone corridors, though the air smelled faintly of iron and damp ash. Ilara lay upon a narrow bed in the healer's quarters, wrapped in linen and the king's cloak. Her breathing had steadied, but her face remained pale, a fragile contrast against the dark furs beneath her. Edric stood by the window, his armor half removed, watching the drizzle streak down the glass like trails of doubt. Behind him, Finn sat quietly on a stool, his small hands clasped together in silent prayer. "Will she wake soon?" the boy asked. Edric turned, his voice steady though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "The castle healer says her wounds are not mortal. She's strong enough to fight." Finn nodded, trying to believe it. His clothes were torn, his shoes soaked through, yet he hadn't left her side since they'd arrived. "She won't understand where she is," Edric added. "Best not tell her the truth yet." "Let her rest." "But she'll know," Finn murmured. "She always knows." Edric studied him for a moment, the stubborn set of his jaw, the flicker of courage in eyes too young for such worry. He recognized that fire. He'd seen it in soldiers who refused to kneel. When the door opened, the castle healer bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, her fever breaks, but her pulse runs uneven." "I've done what I can." "Good," Edric said. "She's not to be moved without my command." The healer hesitated. "Sire, the council will not take kindly to this. They already whisper that you shelter the enemy." "Let them whisper," Edric replied coldly. "Words cannot wound me unless I grant them weight." After the man left, silence settled again. The fire crackled low, painting shifting shadows across Ilara's face. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened slightly, unfocused and dazed. Finn leaned forward at once. "Ilara, it's me. It's Finn." Her gaze drifted toward him, then found Edric, tall, distant, cloaked in the quiet authority of command. "Where am I?" "In Norhollow Fortress," Edric answered. "You're safe for now." Her brow furrowed. "Safe? The king hunts healers." A faint smile ghosted across his lips. Perhaps he found reason not to today. She blinked, confusion and suspicion mingling in her expression. "Why?" Edric didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, kneeling beside her bed so their eyes met. "Because I heard truth in your brother's voice. And I've seen enough of lies to know the difference." Her breath caught. "You risk much for strangers. Then pray you prove worth the risk." His tone was calm, but there was something beneath it, a note of challenge, or perhaps faith. She tried to sit up but winced, clutching her side. Finn reached to steady her. "You shouldn't move. The fever's still strong." Ilara's fingers brushed his. "And you should have run." "I won't leave you," Finn said fiercely. "Not ever." A shadow of tenderness softened her eyes, then faded into weariness. She turned her gaze back to Edric. "They'll come for me. You know that." "I do," he said quietly. "But while you're under this roof, they'll find only me." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain outside thickened, drumming softly against the stone like a distant heartbeat. Finn finally broke the silence. "You're not what they say, are you? The Alpha King? The cruel one?" Edric's jaw tightened. "People name cruelty what they cannot understand." Ilara studied him then, as if trying to see through the armor, through the rumors, to the man who had lifted her from death's edge. "You shouldn't have helped me," she whispered. "The cost will come." "Everything worth saving does," he replied. She closed her eyes again, her breathing slow but steadier now. The firelight danced against her skin, and in that fragile glow, something unspoken passed between them. Not yet trust, but the quiet recognition of two souls standing on opposite sides of the same wound. By the third morning, Norhollow was alive with murmurs. The fortress carried sound like a secret unwilling to stay buried. Servants lowered their voices when the king passed, and soldiers paused mid-step to exchange glances, thick with unspoken judgment. Word traveled faster than truth. The Alpha King had taken in a traitor. Ilara sat by the window of her small chamber, the grey light of dawn soft upon her face. Her hands, though steady, bore the faint tremor of exhaustion. Finn sat on the floor near her feet, drawing invisible lines on the stone with a piece of chalk. The silence between them was fragile, full of questions neither dared to ask aloud. Outside, a bell tolled from the courtyard tower. Each strike felt heavy, as though marking the time left before justice caught up with mercy. When the door opened, Sir Rowan entered, tall, broad-shouldered, and draped in the crimson of the royal guard. His eyes were sharp, loyal, but weary. He bowed slightly to Ilara before addressing the boy. "His Majesty summons you, lad. The council wants your account." Finn froze, chalk snapping in his hand. "Why me?" "They want to know what happened at the river," Rowan said, "and how your sister came to be there." Ilara's voice broke the silence, low but firm. "He's a child. You'll get no truth from fear." Rowan turned to her. "And yet fear is all the council trusts." Moments later he guided Finn out, leaving Ilara alone with the hollow quiet that followed. She pressed her palms together and whispered a prayer she no longer believed anyone heard. Across the fortress in the council hall, Edric stood before 12 men robed in velvet and suspicion. The air was thick with incense and accusation. "My lord," said Chancellor Wistan, his tone smooth as oil. "The woman you've brought into our keep. She's of the borderlands, yes? Her kin were aligned with Lord Kael's rebellion." Edric's gaze was steady. "Her kin may have been. She has not confessed to any treachery." "Of course she hasn't," Wistan countered, his thin lips curling. "Rebels rarely do. The people will see this as weakness. You shelter the very sickness you swore to cure." Sir Rowan stepped forward from the shadows. "With respect, Chancellor, she saved the lives of many who would be dead from plague had she not intervened. That is not rebellion. That is mercy." "Mercy," Wistan sneered, "is a luxury for kings who can afford it. Our enemies interpret it as invitation." The room erupted in murmurs. Edric raised a hand, silencing them. His voice was calm, but the weight of command pulsed through every word. "Our enemies interpret strength as tyranny. If I must choose between the two, I'll choose what keeps this kingdom human." The council members shifted uneasily. Only Rowan met his eyes, approval, quiet and unspoken. Later, when the hall emptied, Rowan lingered. "You've made them nervous, sire." "They've mistaken fear for loyalty," Edric said. "I'll remind them both can kill a kingdom faster than rebellion." Rowan hesitated, then added softly, "You're beginning to care for her." Edric looked toward the arched window where rain whispered against the glass. "She's a mirror," he murmured. "She makes me see what I became." When he returned to the tower chamber, Ilara was awake, her expression unreadable. "Your men look at me as though I carry plague," she said. "Rumors spread faster than reason," he answered. "Then you should let me go." "I can't," Edric said simply. "Can't," she repeated, eyes narrowing. "Or won't." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the goblet beside her bed, offering it to her. "Drink. You'll need your strength." Her fingers brushed his and hesitant, questioning us before taking it. "Strength for what?" "For what comes next," he said quietly. And though his tone was calm, Ilara felt the shift in the air, the faint tremor of approaching change, as if the fortress itself had begun to listen. The rain did not stop for 3 days. It slid down the fortress walls, pooling in the courtyard like melted silver, and its rhythm became the heartbeat of Norhollow, steady, relentless, and cold. Inside her chamber, Ilara had grown stronger, though her body still bore the marks of flight and fever. Yet the true wound was quieter, lodged somewhere between fear and memory. Edric visited her often, though never for long. He came without the weight of crown or armor, dressed simply, his presence more shadow than authority. He asked few questions, and she offered fewer answers. Still, the silence between them began to shift, no longer an absence, but a space where trust could breathe. One afternoon the storm thinned to drizzle. Ilara sat by the fire, grinding dried roots with a mortar stone, the scent of thyme and oak filling the air. She glanced up when she heard the door open. "You shouldn't be working," Edric said, his voice rough from disuse. "You need rest." "I rest when I can," she replied softly. "Herbs don't wait for kings or weather." He stepped closer, eyeing the tools scattered across the table. "What are you making?" "A balm for infection," she said. "Your soldiers carry wounds that haven't healed properly. You should tend to them before the flesh turns." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You presume to advise a king?" She met his gaze evenly. "I advise anyone who bleeds." For a long moment, he said nothing. The fire cracked, filling the room with a soft orange pulse. He watched her hands, deft, unflinching, and wondered how many she had saved before she became hunted. "They say healers see more death than soldiers," he murmured. She paused, fingers stilling over the herbs. "We don't see death," she said quietly. "We watch it choose." The words lingered, heavy as the mist outside. Edric leaned against the table, his expression unreadable. "Tell me," he said finally, "why did you stay to help those rebels? You must have known what it would cost." Elara looked into the fire. "Because sickness doesn't ask who wears a crown or who carries a banner. A fever doesn't know politics." Her answer disarmed him. For the first time in years he felt something stir beneath the armor of command, a flicker of shame, or perhaps admiration. Finn entered then, clutching a bundle of firewood too large for his arms. "They still talk about her," he said, his tone edged with frustration. "The guards. They call her witch." Edric's eyes hardened. "No one will speak that word again within my walls." Finn looked uncertain. "You can stop them." "I can remind them who they serve," Edric replied. After Finn left, Elara spoke again, her voice softer now. "You defend me though you don't believe in me." He turned toward her. "I believe in fairness, and in the right to speak before one is condemned." She studied him, searching for deceit and finding none. "You're not what they say you are," she said at last. "Neither are you," he answered. Outside, the drizzle faded into stillness. The air felt cleaner, though the clouds still loomed. Elara resumed grinding the herbs, slower this time, her movements thoughtful. Edric watched her hands again, how careful they were, how steady despite everything. "Silence suits this place," he said after a while. Words often turn to weapons. "Then maybe silence can heal," she murmured. He looked at her, and in that quiet something unspoken bridged the distance, not yet affection, but understanding born of weariness and will. When he finally left, she watched the door long after it closed, unsure whether to feel safer or more exposed. The firelight flickered across the stone walls, and for the first time since she'd come to Norhollow, the fortress didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a question waiting to be answered. The morning broke with a brittle chill. The fortress, once wrapped in the quiet rhythm of rain, now stirred with the tension of watchful eyes. The air itself felt sharpened, as if the stones remembered every rumor whispered through its halls. Elara could sense it, the way conversations faltered when she passed, the weight of judgment pressing like an invisible chain around her neck. From her chamber window, she could see the banners of Norhollow trembling in the wind. The courtyard below was full of soldiers drilling in tight formation, their armor flashing like scales under the pale light. Each clang of steel echoed the heartbeat of a kingdom that no longer trusted its own mercy. Edric stood in the great hall, the long table before him crowded with his council, 12 nobles in heavy robes, each one a piece of the machine that had long kept Norhollow steady, through fear and tradition. He wore no crown that morning, only the quiet authority of a man who knew he was walking a narrowing path. Lady Catherine sat near the head of the table, her posture perfect, her gaze sharp as polished glass. Once promised to Edric by the will of their fathers, she now studied him with the precision of someone who had lost more than affection. She had lost influence, and influence, in this court, was blood. "The people talk," Catherine said, her voice sweet but edged with steel. "They say the king hides a traitor beneath his roof. And worse, and that he shields her not for justice but for desire." The murmur that followed was thick and eager. Edric met her eyes without flinching. If the truth of a kingdom can be shaken by gossip, perhaps it was never built on truth at all. "Or perhaps," she countered, "you've forgotten the line between compassion and weakness." Sir Rowan shifted beside him, hands clasped behind his back. "My lady," he said firmly, "the king's mercy is not weakness. It's the only thing that has kept this realm from tearing itself apart." Catherine smiled, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Mercy is a luxury, Sir Rowan, one that crumbles under the weight of duty." Edric's patience thinned. "Then perhaps it's time we rebuild duty itself." The silence that followed was absolute, the kind that hums before a storm. When the meeting adjourned, the nobles departed in a flurry of whispers and stiff bows. Only Rowan and Catherine lingered. She rose gracefully, her perfume lingering like memory. "You once swore to rule with reason, Edric," she said softly. "But reason dies when the heart rules the mind." Do not let this woman undo you. He looked at her for a long moment. You mistake healing for undoing. Her smile faltered, but only for a breath. Then may your healer cure you when loyalty fails. When she was gone, Rowan exhaled slowly. She'll turn the court against you if she can. She'll try, Edric replied. But truth stands even when alone. Later he found Ilara in the gardens behind the fortress. The air smelled of damp soil and dying leaves. She was kneeling beside a patch of herbs, her fingers brushing the stems as though apologizing for plucking them. You shouldn't be out here, he said. The council meets with sharper tongues each day. Ilara didn't look up. Let them talk. I've been called worse by kinder people. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. They think your presence weakens me. She finally met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Does it? He hesitated, only for a heartbeat, before answering. No. It reminds me what strength truly is. A faint smile touched her lips, gone as quickly as it came. Then hold to that, Your Majesty. The world outside these walls will not. As she turned back to her herbs, Edric realized that the council's disapproval no longer frightened him. What frightened him was how easily her quiet defiance had begun to steady his own resolve. And far beyond the fortress walls, Lady Catherine's carriage rolled away through the fog, her gloved hand tightening around a folded parchment, a letter she would send before dawn. The first frost came early that year. It crept over the fields surrounding Norhollow like a pale shroud, killing the last of the summer crops and painting the rivers with thin, trembling ice. In the villages below, hunger had begun to whisper, but it was sickness that screamed. The plague moved silently through the poorer districts, a fever that burned fast and took faster. Edric rode through the lower gates at dawn, his cloak drawn tight against the cold. The smell of smoke and sickness clung to the air. Every corner revealed faces hollowed by fear, mothers clutching fevered children, old men praying to gods who had long stopped listening. So Rowan followed close behind. We've sent rations, sire, he said quietly, but the healers are dead or fled. The council forbids anyone from crossing the river. They say the sickness will burn itself out. Edric's jaw hardened. So will the people. When they returned to the fortress, Ilara was waiting in the courtyard, her arms full of linen and herbs. The sickness has reached the eastern farms, she said before he could speak. You know it will not stop there. I know, he replied. But the council... The council? Her voice sharpened. Men who have never touched the hand of the dying? They forbid help because fear is easier to command than hope. Rowan stepped forward. They believe you would flee if you were allowed to treat them. Ilara looked at him, unflinching. And if I stay locked behind stone walls, how many die because of their fear? The silence that followed was thick with the weight of truth. Edric turned away, his thoughts running like blood beneath armor. He had ruled with law, believing it was order that kept the world from chaos. But now law seemed a noose, one he had placed around his own people's necks. At last he said, If you go, you'll be seen as proof of rebellion. If I send you, they'll call it betrayal. Ilara met his gaze steadily. Then let them. A ruler's name means little to the dead. He studied her, the calm in her voice, the conviction burning behind her tired eyes. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. You'll leave before dawn. Rowan will help you cross the river unseen. Rowan's brow furrowed. Sire, that's an order, Edric said. When Rowan left to make preparations, Edric lingered. The air between him and Ilara felt charged, suspended between duty and something dangerously close to tenderness. You're risking everything, she said softly. So are you. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment, the fortress walls seemed to fade. Only the faint crackle of torches and the distant howl of the wind remained. Finn will stay here, Edric continued. He'll be safe under my guard. Ilara nodded. Tell him I'll come back when the fever breaks. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he realized how fragile she seemed, how mortal. If you don't, he said, his voice low, Then this kingdom loses more than a healer. She tried to smile, but her eyes glistened. And what would it lose, my king? Remembrance, he murmured. That mercy once had a name. Before she could reply, he stepped back, his expression hardening once more into that of a ruler. Go. Before I remember, I should stop you. She bowed her head and slipped into the shadows of the corridor, the faint scent of herbs trailing after her. Edric stood long after she had gone, the sound of her footsteps echoing like a promise he could neither keep nor break. Above the fortress, the sky had turned to iron. Snow would come soon, and with it judgment. The snow came sooner than expected, falling heavy and silent over Norhollow. It blanketed the roofs, softened the sound of hooves in the courtyard, and disguised the chill of betrayal rising within the fortress walls. By dawn, the council already knew. The king had released the healer. Lady Catherine was the first to speak it aloud, her words carried by the breath of every servant and guard she passed. He hides his heart where his crown should be, she told them, her tone calm, almost pitying. But pity was only poison wrapped in silk. By midday, the whispers had hardened into accusation. When Edric entered the council chamber, 12 faces awaited him, grim, expectant, and cold. Chancellor Wystan stood. Your Majesty, he began, we are told that the healer fled under cover of darkness. No guard witnessed her escape, no horse left the gate. Yet the people say she crossed the river and tended to the plague. Edric's gaze swept the room. Then the people speak truth. The silence that followed was stunned and sharp. You admit to it? Wystan's voice wavered. 2 aiding 1 branded a traitor. I admit to saving lives when you would have watched them burn. Catherine's eyes glinted like ice. You've broken your oath before your throne. The council demands you relinquish command until inquiry is made. Edric took a slow breath, his hand steady though anger coiled beneath his calm. You mistake obedience for loyalty, Catherine. I've broken no oath, only your illusion of control. Her composure cracked for the briefest instant. And what of the law? Shall mercy now rule the realm? If mercy costs my crown, Edric said, then the crown was never worth wearing. Wystan's fist struck the table. You endanger us all. The nobles will rise. The border lords already question your rule. And now they will see the king's heart swayed by a woman of rebellion. Enough, Edric snapped, his voice slicing through the chamber. The healer's deeds will speak for themselves. Until then, you will hold your tongues. But the council no longer feared his tone. Power, once questioned, begins to rot in silence. When the session ended, Rowan followed him into the corridor. They mean to act, Edric. The nobles plot behind those doors. They'll claim treason if you do not yield. Let them, Edric said, but the words lacked conviction. I'll not condemn an innocent to prove I can still command. Rowan hesitated. You've taught them to obey through fear. Now you ask them to trust through faith. It's not a language they understand. Edric turned sharply, his eyes flashing. Then I'll teach them. Later that night, Rowan found him in the chapel, standing before the stone altar where kings were crowned and condemned. The only light came from the torches flickering along the walls, their flames casting restless shadows over his face. She's not safe out there, Rowan said quietly. The council has sent riders. They'll call it retrieval, but we both know what that means. Edric closed his eyes. I've made my choice. And if they take you for it... He opened them again, steady, resolute. Then I'll stand trial for compassion. By the following dawn, the decision was made. Edric was placed under watch within his own halls, the crown no longer resting on his brow, but on the table before him, a symbol stripped of authority. The people below whispered of rebellion, though none yet dared name it. And far beyond the river, in the shadow of a burning village, Ilara knelt beside the dying. The heat of the flames licked at her back, her hands steady though her heart trembled. If mercy is treason, she whispered to the wind, then let the world call me traitor. The great hall of Norhollow had never been so silent. The banners that once sang of victory now hung limp, as though ashamed of what they witnessed. Edric stood alone before his council, no armor, no sword, no crown. Only the weight of his choices clothed him now. Chancellor Wystan presided at the head of the chamber, parchment in hand, his voice brittle and cold. "Edric of Norhollow, called Alpha King, you stand accused of treason against the realm, of aiding a known traitor and of defying the council's will. What say you?" "I say I've defied fear, not the realm," Edric answered evenly. "And if compassion is treason, then I am guilty." A murmur rippled through the gathered nobles. Some shifted uneasily, others smirked, the scent of opportunity sharp in the air. From the gallery above, a small cluster of townsfolk watched in secret, their breath held as though one sound might condemn them too. Lady Catherine sat among the council, poised and perfect, a faint smile resting on her lips. "You speak of compassion, my king," she said, her tone smooth as glass. "Yet compassion without obedience is chaos. Would you have the people rule themselves?" "They already do," he said quietly. "They rule through hunger, through fear, through the silence we've given them. My throne means nothing if it stands above graves." Rowan, seated near the chamber's edge, clenched his fists beneath the table. His loyalty was torn, soldier to king, but also servant to a kingdom on the edge of ruin. Wystan's voice rose again. "Your words condemn you, Majesty. The council finds cause to suspend your rule until inquiry concludes." Edric looked up at him, a slow fire igniting behind his calm. "You may strip me of title and power, Chancellor, but not of my conscience." Catherine tilted her head, her gaze narrowing. "Then let your conscience comfort you when the gates close." A sharp knock echoed from the doors. A guard entered, breathless. "My lords, the people are gathered at the outer court. They demand the king's presence." "Let them wait," Wystan snapped. "They won't," the guard said. "They speak her name, the healers. They say she saved their children, that she crossed the river with medicine when no one else dared." The council stirred in confusion. Catherine's smile vanished. Rowan stood abruptly. "You hear them, my lords. The people call for truth. Will you silence them too?" Wystan slammed his palm against the table. "This is no place for rabble. They are peasants, easily swayed by lies." Edric took a step forward, his voice low but cutting through the noise. "No, Chancellor. They are the realm. Without them there is no Norhollow." The guard hesitated, then met Edric's eyes. "They ask for you, Majesty. They say their children live because of her, because of your mercy." For the first time since the trial began, Edric smiled, not in pride, but in relief, quiet and human. "Then mercy speaks for itself." Catherine rose from her seat. "You will not leave this chamber." Rowan moved before her could stop himself. "Try to hold him, my lady, and you'll have to hold me too." The air grew taut, heavy with the scent of rebellion and frost. Edric turned to the council one last time. "You wished for a king who obeys, but I was never born to serve fear. I was born to serve the living." And as he walked out through the tall iron doors, the sound of the people's voices met him like a rising tide, desperate, defiant, alive. Behind him, the council fell to chaos. Before him, a kingdom waited for its answer. The prison beneath Norhollow smelled of damp stone and despair. Torches burned low, their flames sputtering in the draughts that crept through narrow cracks. From her cell, Ilara listened to the muffled sounds above, the murmur of guards, the echo of boots, the faint hum of a world that had already decided her guilt. She was weak. Fever had returned, gnawing at her bones with the same quiet cruelty she had fought to cure in others. Her hands trembled as she touched the iron bars, the chill seeping deep into her skin. Days had passed since her capture, or perhaps weeks. Time had lost its meaning in the dark. Footsteps approached, steady and familiar. "Ilara," a voice called softly. "It's me." "Finn?" Her voice cracked, brittle with disbelief. The boy appeared between the bars, thinner than she remembered, his face pale from sleepless nights. "I found you," he whispered. "They said you were dead." She reached for him, her fingers brushing his through the cold iron. "You shouldn't be here. It's dangerous." "I don't care," he said fiercely. "They're saying you'll be taken north for judgment." "That they'll—" "Don't say it," she interrupted, though she already knew. Death traveled faster than mercy in Norhollow. Finn wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "The king knows, Ilara. I told him. I told him what they're planning." Her heart ached. "And what did he say?" "That he'll find a way," Finn said, his voice trembling with fragile hope. "He swore it." Ilara closed her eyes, breathing shallowly. She wanted to believe it, but she knew how fragile promises were when spoken by kings surrounded by wolves. "Finn," she whispered, "listen to me. Whatever happens, you must live. Leave this place. Find the river road. Go south. There are healers there who still remember my name." He shook his head. "Not without you." "Don't be foolish." Her tone softened. "You are all that's left of what's good in me. You must survive that the world may remember mercy still exists." A sudden clang echoed from the corridor. The boy flinched as a guard appeared holding a torch. "Enough!" the man barked. The boy leaves. "Please," Finn begged, "just one more minute." The guard seized his shoulder, dragging him back. Ilara pressed her face against the bars. "I love you, Finn. Remember that, always." He fought against the guard's grip, crying out her name until the sound was swallowed by the stone. Then there was only silence heavier than before. She sank to her knees, clutching at the pendant beneath her torn dress, the silver charm Edric had given her the night she left the fortress. The metal was cold against her palm, its edges worn smooth by her touch. She pressed it to her lips and whispered, "Don't forget me." Above her, the muffled toll of a bell rolled through the darkness, the signal of judgment to come. She looked up, tracing the sound as if it might reveal the sky beyond the stone. In the upper halls, Edric stood before the barred door that led to the dungeons. His face was drawn, sleepless, and shadowed with regret. Rowan waited beside him. "They've set the date," Rowan said quietly. "She'll be taken at sunrise." Edric's jaw tightened. "No." "You can't stop it," Rowan warned. "The council holds command now." "I am still king," Edric said, though the words felt hollow. "And a king who cannot save the innocent deserves no crown." Rowan studied him for a long moment. "Then what will you do?" Edric's gaze shifted toward the darkness below, where the torches burned like dying stars. "Whatever I must," he said. "Before the sun rises." And somewhere beneath those words, the faintest whisper of chains echoed like a heartbeat, steady, defiant, and fading fast. The fortress slept beneath the weight of winter. Snow drifted through the narrow windows, settling like dust on cold stone. In the lower corridors, torches flickered weakly, fighting the dark that clung to every corner. It was the hour before dawn, the hour when loyalty and treason wore the same face. So Rowan moved silently through the passageways, his cloak drawn tight. Every echo of his boots felt too loud, every breath too alive. He reached the gate that led to the dungeons, nodded once to the shadow waiting there, and whispered, "Now." Edric stepped from the dark. His crown was gone, his sword drawn. "Are they alone?" Rowan hesitated. "2 guards at the lower cells. They change posts in minutes. If we move before the bell rings, we might still reach the stables unseen." "Then we move," Edric said. The stairwell spiraled downward, cold and narrow. The air thickened with the stench of rot and fear. When they reached the final gate, Rowan drew a dagger, cutting through the rope that held the latch. The iron groaned as it opened. Ilara stirred at the sound, her body weak but her eyes clear. When she saw him, she froze, disbelieving. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I said I'd find a way," Edric answered. "I keep my word." She shook her head. "If they catch you, they won't." He knelt beside her, unlocking the chains with the keys Rowan had stolen. The cold metal fell away from her wrists, leaving pale bruises behind. "Can you walk?" "I can try." She rose, her body trembling. Rowan draped a cloak around her shoulders. "We have minutes at most," he murmured. The watchtower bell rings at first light. They slipped through the corridors like ghosts. The only sound was the crackle of torches and the faint clatter of keys against Edric's belt. Each turn of the passage felt heavier than the last. Halfway to the stables, the sound of voices broke the silence. Guards. Rowan pressed them into an alcove. The torchlight grew brighter, footsteps drawing near. Ilara's breath quickened, her hand finding Edric's. He squeezed it gently, steadying her. The guards passed, their laughter fading into the dark. When the sound was gone, she looked up at him. "You risk your crown for me." "I risk nothing worth keeping," he said softly. Outside, the snow had turned to sleet. The courtyard lay empty, the stables just ahead. Rowan moved first, scanning the yard. "Clear," he whispered. "Go." They crossed quickly, boots crunching over frozen mud. Edric saddled a horse, his hands shaking from the cold. He lifted Ilara into the saddle, then turned to Rowan. "Ride with us." Rowan shook his head. "I'll hold the gate. Someone must cover your trail." "Rowan." "Go, Edric," he said firmly. "This kingdom will not survive if its only good men are caught in chains." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Edric grasped his friend's forearm. "Whatever happens, you have my thanks." "And you," Rowan said. "My faith." Edric mounted behind Ilara. The gates opened with a groan and the night swallowed them. They rode through the woods, the cold cutting through cloth and bone. The horses' hooves pounded against frozen earth, breath steaming in the air. Behind them, the faint toll of the watchtower bell broke the silence, the signal of discovery. Ilara clutched at her side, her voice breaking. "I can't—" "You can," Edric urged. "Now hold on." But her strength faltered. The fever, the wounds, the cold, it all came rushing back. She swayed, her vision blurring. "Edric," she murmured, her words fading into the wind. "I'm sorry." He caught her before she fell, his arms tightening around her. Her body was burning, fragile as ash. Panic tore through him like fire. "Stay with me," he whispered desperately. "Please." Her head rested against his chest, breath shallow, heart slowing. And as the wind howled through the trees, the boy's voice seemed to echo from memory. "She's dying, please help." The storm came without mercy. Wind tore through the trees, carrying with it shards of sleet that struck like needles. The horse stumbled beneath the weight of snow and exhaustion, its breath steaming in the frozen dark. Edric held Ilara close against him, his cloak wrapped around her, his arms trembling from both cold and fear. "Stay with me," he murmured, voice raw. "We're close." Her head rested against his shoulder, her skin burning through the fabric. Her breath came shallow, uneven, the rhythm of someone already drifting too far. He could feel her pulse falter, its beat faint beneath his fingertips. The path ahead blurred with snow. He guided the horse through the darkness by instinct, trusting memory more than sight. In his mind, the words repeated, a desperate echo of the boy's cry, a plea he could not bear to hear again. "She's dying," he whispered to himself, the wind swallowing the sound. Not again. At last, through the white haze, the shape of an abbey emerged, stone walls half buried in snow, its windows glowing faintly with candlelight. The sight broke something inside him. He spurred the horse forward, the animal pushing on with a last surge of strength until they reached the gate. A woman appeared from the doorway, cloaked in grey. The abbess, her face lined by years and loss, froze at the sight before her. "Help her," Edric said hoarsely, dismounting. His legs nearly gave way beneath him as he carried Ilara into his arms once more. "Please." The abbess studied him, recognition flickering behind her eyes. "Your Majesty." "There is no king here," he said, his voice cracking. "Only a man who won't lose her." Inside, the warmth struck like fire. The air smelled of wax, wine, and old wood. The sisters moved quickly, fetching water, blankets, herbs. Edric laid Ilara on a narrow cot near the hearth. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, hair damp against her cheeks. "She's burning," one of the sisters murmured. "The fever's deep." "Can you save her?" Edric asked. The abbess met his eyes. "We'll try, but her body has endured too much." He sank to his knees beside the cot, his gloved hand finding hers. Her fingers were cold, yet she stirred faintly at his touch. Her lips parted. "You found me," she whispered. "Always," he said. "You said you'd return when the fever broke. I couldn't wait." A faint smile flickered across her face. "You shouldn't have come. I should never have let you go." The abbess motioned to the others and they withdrew, leaving only the sound of the wind pressing against the walls. Edric brushed a damp strand of hair from Ilara's forehead. "Do you remember," he asked softly, "the night by the fire when you said silence could heal?" Her eyelids fluttered. "It can," she breathed. "If the heart listens." He leaned closer, his words trembling. "Then listen to mine, don't let it fall silent." Her hand tightened weakly around his. "You don't command life, Edric." "Then I'll beg it," he said, his voice breaking. "For once, I'll beg." For a moment neither spoke. The storm raged outside, the world shrinking to the flicker of a single flame between them. The abbess returned, placing a cool cloth on Ilara's brow. "The fever may pass with dawn," she said. "If she lasts the night." Edric didn't move. He sat beside her, hour after hour, whispering stories of the fields before war, of the rivers before they ran red. His words wove warmth into the cold air, defiance into despair. And when her breathing faltered, he held her tighter, pressing his forehead to hers. "Not yet," he whispered. "Not while I still have strength to carry you." Outside, the storm began to break, but inside, dawn still felt impossibly far. Dawn came slowly, as if unsure it still had the right to touch the world. The first light crept across the abbey floor, tracing the edges of the worn stones and the folds of Ilara's blanket. Her breathing, once ragged and fragile, had steadied through the night, each rise and fall of her chest a small victory against the cold hand of fate. Edric hadn't moved from her side. The fire had burned down to embers, painting his face in faint red light. His eyes were shadowed, sleepless, but there was something alive in them again, the quiet disbelief of a man watching a miracle he dared not name. The abbess entered softly, her hands folded. "She endures," she said. "She lives," Edric corrected, his voice hoarse. The abbess regarded him with a calm that had seen too many kings undone by love. "And when she wakes?" He said nothing. The question had haunted him all night. Hours passed before Ilara stirred, her eyes opened slowly, clouded with weakness and light. "How long have I slept?" she whispered. "Long enough for winter to grow cruel," he said. She smiled faintly. "And you stayed?" "I stay where I'm needed." Her fingers brushed his hand. "The world needs you elsewhere, Edric. You know that." He looked away. "The council has already taken my crown. The realm will move on without me." "Then go back," she said gently. "Not to rule, but to heal it. The people still look to you. Don't let them believe mercy was your ruin." He stared at her, struck by the calm conviction in her words. "You asked me to return to those who called for your death. I ask you to forgive them," she replied. "The same way you forgave me when you found me in the woods." The wind rattled the windows, scattering flakes of snow against the glass. Outside, the forest stood quiet beneath its white veil, untouched by war or rumor. For a moment, Edric wished they could stay hidden here forever, nameless, forgotten, free. But duty was a chain he could not break, not even for love. "I would trade every stone of Norhollow for one day of peace beside you," he said. "Then it wouldn't be peace," she murmured. "It would be escape." He closed his eyes, the truth cutting deeper than any blade. "And if I return," he asked, "they'll use your name to wound me again." "Let them," she said softly. "A wound that heals leaves proof of life." The abbess returned, carrying a folded parchment sealed with wax. "This arrived at dawn," she said, offering it to him. Edric broke the seal. The letter bore the crest of Norhollow, the council's mark. He read silently, his jaw tightening. "They beg your return," the abbess said, watching his expression. "They beg stability," he replied. "The kingdom bleeds and their politics cannot stop the wound." Ilara's gaze softened. "Then go, end it, not as a king, but as the man who carried me from death." He set the letter aside. "And you?" "I'll recover here. There are others who need healing more than I." He hesitated, then reached into his cloak and drew out the silver pendant, the one she thought lost. "Then keep this," he said. "A reminder that even kings remember." Her eyes glistened. "And when I'm strong again." He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Then we'll see where the road leads. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, endless, and white as forgiveness. The bell from the Abbey Tower tolled once, low and solemn, marking the hour of decision. Edric looked toward the sound, the choice already carved into his heart. The crown awaited, but for the first time it was not power he sought to reclaim, it was purpose. The road to Norhollow stretched long and silent beneath a bruised sky. Frost clung to the edges of the path, and the trees bowed under the weight of old snow. Edric rode alone, his cloak tattered by wind, the crown he once wore wrapped in linen at his side. The abbey had faded behind him hours ago, yet her voice still lingered in his thoughts. "Don't let them believe mercy was your ruin." He repeated those words like a prayer. When the city walls came into view, the guards at the gate froze. The sight of their king returning without escort, without armor, unsettled them more than an army might have. "Open the gates," Edric commanded, his voice steady but cold. The news spread fast. By the time he reached the great hall, the council was waiting. Wystan stood at their head, pale and trembling. "Your Majesty," he began, his tone wary. "We did not expect—" "I know," Edric interrupted. "You expected a ghost or a corpse. Instead, you have me." He walked to the throne but did not sit. His eyes swept over them, Caitrian among them, her face carved in fragile composure. "You summoned me," he said. "Now speak your truth." Wystan swallowed. "The kingdom falters, the people riot, crops burn. Trade has halted at the border. We need your hand to restore order." "My hand?" Edric asked quietly. "Or my name?" Caitrian rose slowly. "We need the man the people once feared," she said. "They'll not follow softness." Edric met her gaze. "Then they'll follow strength of another kind." Her lips parted in disbelief. "You mean to rule through pity?" "No," he said. "Through justice." He stepped closer, the echo of his boots filling the hall. "You've ruled in my absence, yet you let the sick die, the hungry starve, and the weak freeze beneath our gates. You call that strength? You mistake cruelty for control." Wystan stammered. "The realm cannot stand on mercy alone." "Then let it fall," Edric said, voice low but sharp as steel. "Let it fall and be rebuilt by those who remember what it means to be human." The words struck like thunder. No one dared speak. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to shrink under his tone. Finally Rowan entered from the side doors, his cloak still dusted with snow. He bowed his head. "Your Majesty." Edric's eyes softened. "You kept faith when others forgot how." Rowan straightened. "Norhollow still has men worth saving." Edric nodded once, then turned back to the council. "From this day the rule of Norhollow changes. The sick will be treated in every district, no matter their birth. The council will answer not to tradition, but to truth." Caitrian's voice trembled. "You would tear down the order that built this realm." "I would rebuild the order that broke it," he said. "If that threatens your power, step aside." Wystan's face paled. "And if we refuse?" "Then history will remember you as the last lords of an age that died screaming." For a long, unbearable moment no one moved. Then Rowan spoke quietly. "The people wait outside, sire. They heard you'd returned." Edric turned toward the tall windows where faint light spilled over the courtyard below. "Then let them see the king they deserve." When he stepped out onto the balcony, the square erupted, not with fear, but with something deeper. Hope. The word rippled through the crowd like warmth through frost. Edric looked down at them, at the thousands who had once called him cruel. He felt no pride, only resolve. Behind him, the council remained silent. Ahead, the kingdom began to breathe again. And though the crown still lay wrapped and untouched beneath his cloak, for the first time, Edric felt its weight, not as a burden, but as a promise. Weeks passed, and winter began to loosen its grip. The snow melted from the roofs of Norhollow, dripping into the streets like quiet applause from the heavens. Life returned in hesitant steps, market stalls reopening, children laughing in the courtyards, the tolling of the bells signaling not judgment, but renewal. From dawn until dusk, Edric walked among his people. He spoke little, but listened much. Farmers told him of ruined crops, widows spoke of lost sons, and healers shared how they'd run out of herbs before hope. He listened not as a king commanding answers, but as a man gathering truth. Rowan followed him through the days, noting the change in the people's eyes. "They feared you once," he said one morning, "but now they bow from gratitude, not terror." Edric looked toward the horizon where the river glimmered under pale sunlight. "Fear holds a crown steady," he said, "but love holds a kingdom alive." In the lower quarters, Ilara's name had become a prayer. Though she remained far from the fortress, her work reached every corner. Medicines distributed through abbey hands, cures spreading faster than despair once did. Children carried sprigs of thyme around their wrists in her honor, and the sick whispered blessings in her name. When messengers brought word that the plague had finally broken, the news spread like fire through the cold. Norhollow's streets filled with song, not the polished kind sung in courts, but the raw, imperfect music of survival. That evening, Edric stood in the great hall. The council gathered once more. Gone was the tension of defiance. In its place lingered the unease of men facing their own reflection. "The people have endured," Edric said, "not because of us, but despite us. We ruled from fear and they lived through faith." Wistan bowed his head. "What would you have of us now, Your Majesty?" "Not obedience," Edric replied, "responsibility." He turned to Catherine, whose pride had dulled into quiet resignation. "You once told me mercy would destroy us. Do you still believe that?" Her voice faltered. "I believed fear was safety. I see now it was only chains." Edric nodded slowly. "Then learn what freedom costs and help me pay it." When the council adjourned, Rowan lingered. "You've done what few kings dare," he said. "You made peace without blood." Edric smiled faintly. "Peace is never without cost. The blood simply dries where no one sees." Later that night, he walked the outer walls alone. The air smelled of thawing earth and wood smoke. Below, he could see torches flickering along the river road, travelers, merchants, pilgrims, all returning to a land reborn. He paused, gazing at the stars scattered like distant embers. For the first time in years, he didn't feel their coldness. Somewhere beyond the forests, he knew Ilara was still healing, still giving life where the world had taken too much. He closed his eyes, remembering her voice. "A wound that heals leaves proof of life. Then let this kingdom bear its scars," he whispered. The next morning the abbey sent word, a letter sealed with wax, its message simple: "The healer walks again." When he read those words, something inside him eased. The ache of loss, the weight of guilt, all softened into quiet strength. He looked out over Norhollow, the sunlight spilling through the windows like grace itself, and thought not of crowns or thrones, but of the simple, fragile gift of endurance. The fortress no longer felt like a monument to power, but a keeper of lessons written in stone, that mercy once sown could outlive kings. And as the bells rang in the distance, echoing over the hills, Edric smiled to himself, knowing the sound would reach her ears wherever she walked. Spring returned to Norhollow quietly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had finally settled over the land. The river ran clear again, reflecting a sky that no longer seemed burdened by sorrow. Flowers bloomed in the fields beyond the walls, wild, unrestrained, untouched by decree or duty. Edric stood by the eastern gate, his cloak loose around his shoulders. The crown no longer sat on his head, but rested in a velvet pouch carried by Rowan, who stood nearby. "You should wear it," Rowan said softly. "The people still call you king." Edric shook his head. "Let them call me what they will. A crown can rule, but it cannot heal." Rowan smiled faintly. "And yet somehow you did both." Edric's eyes drifted toward the distant road, where a small group of travelers approached. The sunlight caught on something silver, a pendant glinting at a woman's throat. He didn't move at first, afraid that the vision was another memory. But when she drew closer, her eyes lifted, and he knew. "Ilara," he breathed. She smiled, the kind of smile that spoke of miles traveled and battles fought, not with swords, but with endurance. "I heard Norhollow no longer needs a healer," she said. I came to see if the rumors were true." "They're not," he said, voice low. "We'll always need one." She studied him for a moment, noting the lines that hadn't been there before, the softened weight in his posture. "You look tired." "I am," he admitted, "but it's the kind of tired a man earns." They walked together through the garden, where new vines climbed the ancient stone. Birds sang softly in the branches, their songs threading through the quiet like gratitude. "You changed this place," she said. "The people talk about you with something close to love." He smiled faintly. "They don't talk about the king anymore, only the man who listened." Ilara stopped by the fountain, her reflection rippling in the water. "And what does that man listen to now?" He looked at her. "To the silence you once taught me to trust." For a while they said nothing. The wind moved gently through the leaves, carrying with it the scent of new rain. There was peace between them, not the kind born from passion, but from understanding. "You could have stayed away," he said at last. "The world beyond these walls must be kinder." She shook her head. "Kindness doesn't belong to the world, it belongs to those who choose it." "And I chose to come back." He reached into his cloak and drew out the silver pendant she'd once lost. "You left this behind." Her eyes softened. "I thought it gone." "Some things find their way home," he said. Their hands met as he placed it in her palm, fingers brushing for a moment that stretched beyond time. From the gate, Rowan called out, "The council awaits your word, Majesty." Edric turned, then looked back at Ilara. "Would you walk with me?" She nodded. "Always." As they entered the great hall together, the nobles rose, not in fear, but in reverence. The crown sat upon the table, glinting in the light. Edric touched it briefly, then let it rest where it was. "This crown," he said, his voice steady and clear, "belongs not to the strongest hand, but to the truest heart. Let it remind us that mercy is not weakness, but the foundation of all strength." The hall fell silent. Outside, bells rang, not for war or coronation, but for peace. When he turned to Ilara, there was no court, no throne, no rule, only two souls who had endured enough to finally understand what it meant to live. He smiled. "I carried you once," he said, "but now it is you who carries me." And as the story of Norhollow closed, the heart of the Alpha King beat not for power, but for love. Subscribe now to follow more tales of kingdoms redeemed by compassion, and click the next story to continue this journey of hearts that dared to heal a broken world.